Let's talk about books, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Okay. Fuck, did I hit record? I don't think I hit record. Hey y'all, welcome back. This is my channel, Kaylin May, and on here I talk about books mostly, food a little bit, and sometimes I do the random boyfriend tag or morning routine because whatever, I'm on YouTube. What else are you gonna do? So today we're going to do a book review. We, collectively, I am going to do a book review of The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. And this book is part of my Asianreadathon challenge. And I finished it last night at like 1 in the morning. I stayed up and just raced through the end. And I really liked it. Yeah, I'm gonna get into it a little bit. But this book was actually, I didn't realize this, but originally published in 1994 and just recently got translated from Japanese. And so the English translation has just come out. I thought this was a new book, but it turns out this book actually has been out for like 25 years. That was an interesting piece of information I got recently. So this book is sort of an Orwellian dystopian novel. It takes place on this unnamed island and none of the characters have names, and things start disappearing. And at first it's sort of, I don't know, they're just sort of small things. Emeralds and perfume and the ferry boat that takes them back and forth to places. And then it starts to get to be bigger things, things that actually impact more people, novels. The types of disappearances just get bigger and bigger and bigger. So when these things disappear, it's not only that the objects disappear, in fact the objects don't physically disappear, it's that people's memories of the objects disappear. They lose their relevance, they lose their meaning. Like if novels disappeared, this would just be a collection of paper that the story wouldn't mean anything to me. I wouldn't understand how someone could have imagined a story like this. And what they're asked to do is then get rid of the thing that has disappeared, so people will then burn it or bury it or throw it out in the sea or whatever. So it's so completely gone, there is no meaning left. So I can't remember, wow, I am somebody who loves to read, I am somebody who loves to read novels. Anything about that identity is gone, anything in my memory would be gone. And the thing is that there are certain people for which this doesn't work. That there are a couple people who keep their memories, who keep the relevance of these objects, who wake up that morning because the disappearances happen overnight. They wake up the next morning and the novel is still a novel and it still means something to them and it's still relevant to them and important and part of who they are and how they see themselves. And those people are dangerous to this status quo, and therefore the Memory Police, a sort of state surveillance organization, tries to weed them all out, and you never really know what happens to them. They just sort of get carted off, and the plot really starts happening when the main character is hiding somebody who can keep his memories. And that's about the extent of the plot, which was interesting. And so things just progress as the novel progresses. So I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars. It was challenging. It was interesting. The first 3/4 of the book, as I was reading it, I was really enjoying it. I was caught up in it. I was made anxious by it. I enjoyed sort of the atmospheric way it was written. I could really understand sort of the stakes, and there felt like there was some amount of momentum. But then as it progressed, I realized that we were never going to get any sort of resolution to the plot, that there was never going to be a fleshed outness to the background of the motivations. There was never going to be sort of there was never going to be any description of the mechanics of how things were disappearing or any sort of delve into the motivations of why something might be disappearing. There was no background on the Memory Police. There was no sort of like bigger world building where we could have learned more about like who was behind the sinister state force and what their motivations were, what their MO was, why they wanted to control this group of people, what the point was, and also like what happens after they could be controlled to the largest extent that they were controlled. We just never got, that would have been a different story in a way. Like that story would have been a plot-driven story. What happens to the people who get taken by the memory police? What happens to the resistors? When does it resolve? Like, the question comes out, like, what happens after when they leave? This book is not a plot-driven book, and so that was not important. And so the last probably 25% of this book, I sort of had that realization that these things weren't going to get resolved. And at first it was really irritating to me. And actually, even when I finished the book, I was just sort of left with that feeling of wanting more, having so many questions. I'm somebody who thinks critically about a lot of things, and I'm very curious, and I eat up those sorts of backstories. I think I would have loved that plot and really invested in it. And this is just not that book. And so at first I think I was left wanting a little bit. But then I went on to Goodreads to mark this book as finished, because can you finish a book if you're a booktuber without marking it on Goodreads? And I read the review by this woman, March Payne, and she shared a quote from a different Yoko Ogawa book. It's a novel titled Revenge, and this is the quote. I'll put it up on the screen, but I'll also read it to you. It says, "The prose was unremarkable, as were the plot and the characters, but there was an icy current running under her words, and I found myself wanting to plunge into it again and again." And that actually shifted my perspective on this book. It made me realize that while it was uncomfortable for me not to have a plot by the end, or just sort of like unsatisfying in that way, that I wanted that plot, I wanted that resolution, I wanted some backstory, I wanted some movement in a different way, I wanted motivations, I'm really interested in the motivations of it, that what this book did have was that icy current, this sort of dystopian undercurrent, and that we were plunged repetitively into it, and it was actually taken to its furthest extreme in a way that I actually think is really brave of an author to do. And I think Yoko Ogawa ended up taking the path less traveled, the one that didn't rely on these sorts of narrative structures, and instead just took this idea, it was an idea, and she played it out to the farthest reaches of itself, and then created texture within that idea. And what ended up emerging was sort of this meditation on sense of self. This meditation and this undercurrent ends up being very relevant right now. And to me specifically, it resonated so much once I was able to have a little bit of distance and perspective from it. So I went to bed, and as I was lying in bed, I was thinking a lot about this. This book thinks about, like, how are we who we are? What makes up ourselves? Is it our bodies? Is it our memories? Is it the objects we own? Is it our profession? Is it what we do? Is it how we move through the world? Is it who we know and our relationships? And it explores that by then removing some of those. What happens when objects disappear? What about, I wear an emerald ring. What if emeralds disappeared and this ring is very meaningful to me? And what if it disappeared? Okay, does that change my sense of self at all? Okay, what about larger things? What about, my father loves to hike. What if all trails disappeared and therefore became less relevant, and hiking disappeared? And then not only is the act of hiking gone, but any memory with my dad that has to do with hiking is no longer relevant. And that is the time that I get to connect with my dad. So does that make our relationship less relevant? Does that erode that sense of self? And so what happens when what disappears is your profession? What if you're a hat maker and hats disappear and you have to completely pivot? You have to come up with, it's not only that it's just no longer an option. You cannot be a hat maker. It is no longer relevant to you. And so now you have to come up with something else to do. That became a really pertinent question to me. What do we do when that sense of self is challenged, whether it's by these disappearances or by a global pandemic that's, limiting what we can do and how we can do it? So that's where I started to find this common ground actually with this character, and this idea of of your career no longer being viable just sort of made me think about how this pandemic has positioned my career. I work in arts and cultural programming and event production. My entire career is built on bringing sometimes tens and hundreds of thousands of people together to experience things, whether I'm producing a concert or a lecture series or a huge 4th of July party with 70,000 people in LA. The point is to gather people into physical space with one another and experience something together. And that is what my career is. I'm a director of production, and that career right now, that profession, is not viable in that form anymore. There are forces larger than myself, this pandemic and public health and safety, that have made it so that I cannot gather folks together and won't be able to. People are talking about large events and gatherings being canceled or postponed until well into 2021. So I don't have the option to do the thing that I do for potentially a year. And that's a long enough time that's going to impact my ability to earn money doing that I'm going to either have to pivot out of my field, or what my job is currently trying to do is how do we then pivot to either digital production or become relevant in some other way. And the thing is because what I do is I work for clients who want events, I have lost all of my clients and all of my projects. I currently have no projects at work, and therefore am on the chopping block to then lose my job. I'm in the process of potentially losing my job. And the thing is this job is something that's incredibly important to me. I love what I do. I believe in what I do. It is actually a part of my identity. And so this question of when that disappears, if you had asked me in January if I thought that in May, for a year, my entire profession, something I got a master's degree in and something that I spent years working towards, that it just would not even exist, it wouldn't be viable, that nobody would be gathering in any way, shape, or form in these large scale arts and cultural spaces that they used to for over a year, I just wouldn't believe you. What could cause just a sudden disappearance like that? And the 2020 answer to that is a pandemic, and the Yoko Ogawa answer to that is the memory police. And now, just like these characters, I have to cope, I have to pivot, I have to figure out on sort of the immediate surface level, how am I going to make money? How do I make myself still relevant at work so that I still have a job? If I don't still keep my job, how do I find a new job that I don't hate and doesn't put me in harm's way? And then on sort of this deeper scale, how do I reckon with sort of the loss of self and the loss of these things that are important to me? Yeah, it's hard. I'm somebody who dedicates a lot of time to my work, and somebody who also has always had indicators of success come from either my job or my degrees, or I don't know, I'm a type A person, I'm a workaholic type person, and I am somebody who plans, and this has just thrown me for a loop. And it's not only called into question the immediate sort of survival moment questions, but also this larger sense of identity, that things are disappearing in my life that are really meaningful to me, and what do I do? And so that really resonated. And I think that it's not just, it's funny, it's not also just that this job might not be, I might not be able to do it, but it's these other things too. It's all of these things are disappearing from my life overnight, dining in restaurants and drinking tea, getting my chai latte and reading in a coffee shop and gathering with my friends and going to concerts and going to the library and not feeling super freaked out in the grocery store and having to, there's also this idea of scarcity, that this book also talks about more and more foods start disappearing and they are having to make do with less and less. And if I wanted to get paper towels right now, good luck, toilet paper, bread flour, there are things that are just, it's just a different world. And so in that way, I found I had a lot more in common with this book, and the existentialness of it resonated with me a lot more than I was expecting, and it resonated on a second thought. It was interesting. As I was reading it, my first sort of inclination was, oh, I want this plot, I want this motivation, I want this backstory, I want answers. And so I was frustrated. And then as I sort of let it sit in and sink in and thought about it, it was, no, I really connect to this story. I really feel empathy for these characters. And the thing is this book doesn't give you any answers. How do you reinvent yourself? These characters just sort of like pick up and move on, and those who can still remember just grieve and hide and fear. And so I don't know that there are answers in that book, but it definitely took a part of my current sort of struggle and angst and thought process and brought it from the darkness into the light. For that, I am really grateful. There was also, and I want to bring this up, an article recently published in the Paris Review called "Fuck the Bread is Over." And it's by this woman, Sabrina Ora Mark. And she puts this idea of sort of like the pandemic's impact on sense of self this way. And I want to read a couple of quotes from this article to just sort of bring it into conversation with Yoko Ogawa. So these are pulled from multiple sections in this article, but I'm just going to read them for you. So she says, Sabrina Ora Mark writes, "What does it mean to be worth something, or worth enough, or worthless? What does it mean to earn a living? What does it mean to be hired? What does it mean to be let go? In fairy tales, form is your function and function is your form. If you don't spin the straw into gold, or inherit the kingdom, or devour all the oxen, or find the flower, or get the professorship, you drop out of the fairy tale and fall over its edge into an endless blank forest where there is no other function for you, no alternative career. The future for the sons who don't inherit the kingdom is vanishment. What happens when your skills are no longer needed for the sake of the fairy tale? A great gust comes and carries you away. And maybe the bread, as I've always understood it, really is over. The new world order is rearranging itself on the planet and settling in. Our touchstone is changing color. Our criteria for earning a life, a living, are mutating like a virus that wants badly to stay alive." I read that article after reading this book, and there was just so much there. This idea, this book is almost like a fairy tale in a way, and more of a Grimm, the Brothers Grimm style fairy tale. But her point of this idea of, like, in fairy tales, the princes who come and they don't slay the dragon, they just disappear from the book. They become no longer relevant, and the one who comes and does is the relevant one. And right now, I feel like the prince who didn't slay the dragon, I feel like the vanished part of the fairy tale, because I can't slay the dragon, I can't produce events, I can't do what I do. And so now I'm sort of dealing with this vanishment of self, and also these disappearances of things in my life. And it's changing meaning for me. It's changing the meaning of, what does it mean to work? What does it mean to have a job? What does it mean to be let go of this job? Like, if I get let go of this job, I think that will mean something different to me now than it would have meant 6 months ago. If I had gotten let go from this job, 6 months ago, I would have been devastated in a different way. And this idea of, like, she uses this idea of the bread is over, because she keeps calling her mom. This is sort of like a motif that keeps coming back in her article. She calls her mom, says she can't find bread flour, and her mom keeps saying, "Fuck the bread is over." And she uses this idea of, like, the bread is over. The world as we have understood it has changed. And I think that, like, I'm in that reckoning right now. The world as I've understood it has changed, and yet I must move on and move forward, and life goes on, and I will make meaning, and I will pivot, and I will, either within this job or within another one, find a way to move forward, both financially and emotionally, and, like, with my sense of self-identity, which has actually, it's funny, it feels like I use these words like disappear and vanish, and a lot of these things have these really kind of sad connotations, and they do, but it's funny, with the disappearance of some ideas of who I am, I've actually been able to broaden the scope of who I could be, and sort of widen what I allow myself to spend time doing and think about, and what I might be willing to be interested in and take on. And so the edges are blurring a little bit for me. And I don't know that that's completely a bad thing. This time and this reimagining of ourselves and our world, it's filled with both grief and possibility. It's like, it's got a little bit of both anxiety and expansion, you know? And so I don't really know where I'm going with that, but just to say, this book resonated with me in that way, and that's one of the reasons I really loved it. And I don't know that if I had read this book at a different time, I think I probably would have not liked it that much. And so, well, I think I would have enjoyed the first part of it and then just let my frustrations get the better of me. And so, yeah, Yoko Ogawa was ahead of her time in a lot of ways, and dystopia sometimes lives in fiction and sometimes lives in reality. And I'm going to do some thinking on how to make meaning and what my sense of self is and how to continue to expand in this time. And I hope that you can too. So I'd love to hear from you, whether you've read this or the article, Fuck the Bread is Over, or have just, you know, how are your careers doing? How are you doing? How's your sense of self doing? What have you been thinking about in this time? Are you having an existential crisis also? Who knows? But anyway, I hope you are all well as usual. I hope your families are well. And I send, you know, love and peace in this time. Please like this video and comment on it. I really do. I'm curious. I feel like this is a conversation I would love to have, like, with somebody and friends. And I don't know. You guys are now my friends, so if you have something to say, I'd love to chat about it. But yeah, like, comment, subscribe to this channel. I'm going to be continuing to review books. I just have a huge stack of books I'm reading through, so I will let you know what I think as I read them, and I will see you on Sunday. So take care, be well, see you later. All right.